Hello, I'm Elizabeth Puranam and these are the top stories on Al Jazeera. US President Barack Obama says he will continue to pursue diplomacy to try to get Syria to hand over its chemical weapons. But in a speech on American television, he said all options are still on the table. Al Jazeera's Patty Culhane has more.
U.S. President Barack Obama addressed the nation to try and convince the majority of Americans and members of Congress that the U.S. has a moral need to intervene in Syria with what he called a limited strike on the Syrian military. He's made these very same arguments in the past, and so far polls show he hasn't been able to convince the majority of Americans. An overwhelming majority say that the U.S. shouldn't intervene, and he has been losing support in Congress. The president expressed optimism that some sort of diplomatic solution can be worked out. He seemed to be taking some of the credit for what he's calling the Russian proposal, saying that the U.S. Secretary of State will meet with his Russian counterpart on Thursday.
The United Nations is in urgent need of funding to help Syrian children living in the Zaatari refugee camp in Jordan. The UN runs 3 schools there that have now reached their capacity. Only 11,000 of the 30,000 Syrian children there are able to attend classes. $11 million are needed to build new school buildings and train teachers. The Philippine Army is working to free up to 180 people being held hostage in the south of the country. The standoff began on Monday when the military arrested 5 armed members of the Moro National Liberation Front. Al Jazeera's Jamila Alindogan has more.
Right now, at this point, since fighting broke out early Monday morning, there's been no letdown in clashes between the Philippine government and the MNLF fighters. They still managed to contain and control 3 villages at the center of Zamboanga City. Over 180 civilians are still being held hostage by the fighters, and it's become increasingly a humanitarian concern, as some human rights observers have been saying that so many families are actually trapped in those villages, even if they're not hostages, unable to bring in food. They haven't eaten. The city remains on lockdown. Curfew has been imposed. So it's become increasingly harder for those who are living there trapped in the area where the fighting is actually at.
You can find the latest on all those stories and much more at aljazeera.com.